I'm going to give him till 10 after. Thank you. We're going on camera, Liz. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It being 6:10 on Thursday, May 1st, 2025, we will begin the first of our many fiscal year 2026 budget hearings for the Committee of Ways and Means. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for all those who serve in our military at home and abroad, and for their families. Thank you. Okay, Clerk Semino, could we have the roll call, please?
Councilor Baraka?
Here.
Councilor Moran?
Here.
Councilor Flaherty?
Here.
Councilor Maglio?
Here.
Councilor Reynolds is currently not here.
Thank you very much. Okay, first order of business this evening is the approval of minutes for February 24th, 2025, March 4th, 2025, and March 10th, 2025. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. We have no old business this evening. For folks who may be watching at home, this is the opening evening of our annual budget review. The Committee of Ways and Means will be meeting about 3 times a week throughout the month of May to go over the mayor's budget proposal. Please send questions, comments to towncouncil@braintreema.gov. A public hearing on the town budget, which will allow public comment, will be held on Tuesday, May 27th at 7 p.m. All these meetings are being televised and recorded by BCAM for cable and live stream on YouTube. So if you aren't watching right now, you can watch it at your convenience. And I just want to make a note, one of the things we're doing differently this year for my council colleagues, I did reserve time on the 19th for any amendments, discussions, anything that we want to bring forward for this committee's consideration. We do have dedicated time set aside on the 19th, and I just ask that as we go through the process, if amendments are being considered, I think during the course of the meetings is an appropriate time to discuss those, and we can take things out of order if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Okay, so with that, let us begin. 25018, Mayor, FY 2026, operating budget, or take up any action relative thereto. This evening, we are joined by the Town Council's auditor, Sean McGoldrick from, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I forgot the name of your firm, Sean, CLA. Thank you, Councilor Moran. And as well as Finance Director Mike Esmond. So thank you both for being here this evening, and I will turn it over to you, Director Esmond.
Chair and members of the council, first just want to say thank you on behalf of Mayor Joyce and myself for the opportunity to come in and kick off the fiscal 26 hearings and talk about revenue. I have a brief presentation, not too many slides, I promise. I will work through the material pretty quickly, but mainly just recaps the material in the introductory sections of your budget materials. But I'm going to hit a few points and obviously then be happy to take any and all questions. So just by quick recap from the mayor's presentation on Tuesday, and she covered at a high level a lot of the themes that we've all been working collaboratively on. We reported that for fiscal 26 we're looking at revenue growth without free cash of about 3.2%. So specifically when you remove the free cash from the 25 budget, base growth of 3.2%. And that is, as she stated, that's really kind of in line with our projections, our long-term projections for town revenue growth from year to year. You can see I did sort of in this chart just grab out the specific revenue line. So while I'm primarily talking about fiscal 26, I'd be happy to talk about any of the further out year projections for 27, 28, and 29, but we will continue to provide those out year forecasts in our budgets and continue to discuss them in as we do in this budget where there are changes. So there is a section in the budget where we talk about the original 26 projection last year and what's changed this year. And you will see at the highest level, at the largest number, there was not much change, but there is movement between the major revenue categories. So I'm going to walk through those revenue categories in some detail and then and conclude. But total operating revenues for the budget forecast for fiscal 26 is $175.7 million. That you can see the components of it and the represented visualized in the pie chart to the left. And then I did provide for the council members just a quick historical snapshot I took fiscal 20 because I think that's the most appropriate year by way of comparison. Fiscal 21, we are already into the pandemic, so there was some anomalous data in there. But if you look, you can see that the revenue stack or the mix of the revenues the town collects as far as and supports its operations with, it hasn't changed dynamically. You will see in fiscal 26, we're sort of at the high water mark as far as our reliance on tax revenues from the levy. It hasn't changed, again, too dynamically, but it is something of importance, again, to remind residents that the town's by far the largest revenue source is our levy, and the components we receive as far as from the state and our local receipts really make up roughly about a quarter of our total revenue. And then other financing typically bounces in the 1 or 2% range, depending on probably the unique circumstances of any year. Turning to the tax levy specifically, this table really just runs the fiscal 24 actuals through fiscal 29's forecast. Again, focusing on 26, the year-over-year change is about $3.9 million in new revenues to support fiscal 26 operations, accounting for Prop 2.5 and new growth. The 3.9 grows to over the next 3 fiscal years to 4.1. So as far as new revenue that's available to the town in any given year, with the growth, the normal growth of 2.5, you can see it run. This gives you a pretty good visualization of what that amounts to. And with the current new growth we currently have, I mean, again, we're averaging something over those 4 years, fiscal 26 through 29, about $4 million a year in new revenue associated with the levy. This contrasts pretty notably to fiscal 25, because fiscal 25 we had the operating override that was approved in June of last year. This would be what would return back to what I would characterize as a normal year under Prop 2.5. So if you were, for illustration, with these tax revenue forecasts for 26, if you were to take the valuation changes that we had in fiscal 25 and extend the same growth across the different classifications for property classifications, the average single-family home taxpayer their bill would increase by something in the range of $175 to $200 a year. In fiscal 26, from fiscal 25. Again, I'm characterizing that as sort of a normal 2.5 year. So one of the questions I know that came up quite a bit last year in the discussion around the override was how the long-term implications of Prop 2.5 are affected, and this sort of illustrates that point, is that we revert back to the same restrictions. In the subsequent years, we're bound by the regular growth of 2.5, as far as the actual growth of the tax levy from year to year. So I think the key part for me to highlight for the tax levy forecast is the new growth assumptions. As you saw in the chart before, right now we're budgeting for an $800,000 new growth figure. I included the chart to sort of visualize some historical trends in new growth. Last year's number, we were over $1 million. There was a few elements that explain that, particularly on the personal property tax component, that were most likely not going to be repeated in fiscal 26. But there are some encouraging trends to point to that we feel support the $800,000 forecast. As I noted here, we're looking at right now through March about 13% year-over-year growth from last year with respect to residential and commercial building permits. As far as the total cost of construction that's been permitted. And so, we feel that the 800,000 is a good approximation for what that baseline would translate to. I think we're going to continue to work to refine a better forecasting approach to account for anticipated new growth impacts associated with specific projects. But if we capture new growth based on that, the same essentially staying on trend with where we were last year, we feel that the 800,000 is certainly achievable. And I don't want to say we know for sure, because we won't know until we actually complete the process in the fall. But the trends are certainly through March looking favorable for us to continue to see permitting activity come to support this, support the $800,000 forecast. On state aid, I think the mayor touched on it briefly on Tuesday night, but just to reiterate the points, we are in her budget that's filed. Right now, we're only assuming a net local aid number of 0.1% growth year over year, and you can see in the table that's in front of you the buildup of that. Actual gross receipts, were under Governor Healy's House 1 proposal, actually increased by 2.6. Somewhat of a unique challenge this year was the growth in the state assessments and charges of almost 14%. And that really comes down to two categories. It's in the retired teachers' health insurance and the charter school tuition pieces at the bottom. So those are in essence, essentially credits against our state aid that we receive. And essentially wipe out the actual 2.6% increase. So it's year over year, it translates to in dollars 28,000. We're encouraged that the House budget increased the Chapter 70 allocation. They have, I think, concluded their amendment process, and it does not look like they will support at this moment the unrestricted general governmental aid at the same level that was filed for in House 1. But we also know that there's still one of the legislative bodies still needs to entirely go through its budget adoption process, and then the conference committee will have to negotiate all the final numbers. So we have quite a bit of ways to follow this. I think the hopeful thing is that the number that the mayor has filed here that's represented is the low number, and we'll hopefully continue to see updates and hopefully some encouraging news from Beacon Hill about what the final numbers will be. But it is a challenge, I think, going forward. We'll have, I will continue to have to work to refine the forecast for these. But if House 1 were to be the final number that was sustained, and we continued this trend, obviously we'd be looking at potentially scenarios where we would be getting less local aid than the prior year at this growth. So we'll have to, continue to study what that is. The retired teachers' health insurance is a difficult number to forecast. There's many factors going on there. There's how many teachers are actually retiring, and we're billed in arrears, but also the underlying cost of medical care, et cetera, is also a piece of that. So there's some factor, much of that is not in our control, other than we need to be ready to account for the impact of that on state aid going forward. For local receipts, I will try to recap. There's a lot of lines here and a lot of different categories. This is obviously our most varying category of revenue in our operating budget. There's a number of items here I'd want to just quickly highlight, hit on. Overall, you can see year-over-year growth from our FY25 projected number is 6%. Sean and I were just discussing, there's probably some important points of comparison. So if you recall in fiscal 25's budget, we had budgeted for the potential adoption or the adoption of the Municipal Empowerment Act that had been filed by Governor Healy with a fiscal value in fiscal 25 of $921,000. We had the motion that was adopted essentially said free cash shall support that the budget in that amount unless the Municipal Empowerment Act is adopted by the legislature and then also accepted by the town council as well. That did not happen, and so we did need to rely on the $921,000 in free cash. This year, we do not assume, it's been refiled by Governor Healy, but we do not assume that any of the revenue associated with that adoption at this time. To make sure that the adjustment, sort of apples to apples in that regard, can be, it can be represented here. The 22.6 million is backing out, does not account for the 921. So that's really essentially the adjusted budget, showing 921, not as a local receipt, bless you, but as a, in our other finance category. So when you look at the projected for fiscal 25, that gives you a better apples to apples comparison when you're looking at the 23 million that is currently in our projected number for fiscal 25, and then you can see for fiscal 26, a number of the fiscal value is $24.4 million. So that's total growth year over year of about 1.6 or 6%. You can follow the main drivers of the change in the second and left column in the right column all the way to the second from the right column in the column all the way to the right. The largest increase is associated with the proposed increase of the year 2 of the 3-year proposal to increase each year the trash collection fee, the residential trash collection fee by $50. So that would bring the annual fee collected over 4 quarters to $250 in fiscal 26. And that makes up, again, the largest portion of that increase. A couple other notable year-over-year changes. So you can see the motor vehicle excise tax is forecasted at $7.5 million. You can see how that compares if you go to look at 24's actual. In fiscal 25, right now I've got what's shown here as a forecast of 7.1 in our projected number. I expect we will likely, now that we've got the first and second commitments in, I think we will likely present an updated number for that. That will be revised upward. Right now, year over year, we're trending about 2% more than fiscal 24's commitments. So that's the basis really of the fiscal 25 proposed for the year. So that percent change is probably likely to be reduced by a couple percentage points with that adjustment. The meals tax and hotel taxes, the year-over-year changes are not substantial in the meals tax case, but we are continuing to see growth, let's say normalizing, coming off of very high, even double-digit numbers, kind of post-pandemic, as the reopening allowed for us to see substantially growth in sales. That's more normalized, but is continuing to see growth. And with respect to the hotel tax, a notable footnote to the fiscal 25 projection, in the 3 months that make up the third quarter of collections in fiscal 25, one of the largest property in Braintree, which makes up over 20% of our inventory, was basically closed. Due to the aftermath of a fire and the repairs, et cetera, that was being put in. That's the Hyatt. So if you account for that adjustment, again, if you account for the fact that there was a substantial amount of inventory that wasn't able to even be taxed, generate revenue for the hotel and tax revenue for the town, that percent change year over year is not as substantial as the 7.7 that's calculated and shown there. That impact is probably overall something in the range of $100,000 in the quarter to us, for that losing that inventory itself. Because we're now trending something close to, for the hotel taxes, we're between $400,000 to $500,000 averaging a quarter. For the pilot, just what's represented here is probably just a couple notes. We are forecasting a modest increase, 5.5%. We have, that reflects the increases in the pilots, as well as a couple that we are concluding negotiations with for some modest increases as well with those. And I know historically we give you the detail for the pilots, so we can send you the detail behind the different components of that. I touched on trash fees. I'm going to probably move a little bit quicker through some of the other ones, but fees in general, we've got a 10.3%, so a lot of that has to do with just sort of forecasts given some of the increases we worked with our departments to adopt this year. Right now, we're not anticipating or budgeting for any new additional fee increases. We adopted a policy last year that we annually are going to review all the fees, each department, to make sure that they remain appropriate. But I would expect, since most departments went through a process of doing that extensively last year, I would not expect there to be, meaningful numbers of fee changes across any of our departments. Notwithstanding, I think we owe kind of a further update to Ways and Means on a couple we're still working on reviews on. I think the mayor touched on one was the parks and recreation, and we have a couple others that we still have not made any, we haven't made updates to for fiscal '25. Rental revenue, that increase really reflects the annualized value. The biggest driver of that is the annualized value of the inadequate tenants. That's a 3-year lease that was effective last September, and there is escalation in that as well. I'll jump to just a couple more. Licensing and permits, you can see we've got a 3% increase. We are trending right now to be about 2.6, 2.56 for fiscal '25. So the growth there, as I noted earlier, we were looking at a year-over-year increase in building permitting fees, and we also most building permit fees were increased to some extent this year. So that's also some residual benefit of that as we annualize the fee increases. Those fee increases went into effect, I think, in I want to say October of last year. Finally, on investment income, this number right now we're projecting 1.974 is assumed in Mayor Joyce's fiscal '26 budget. Year over year, that's 5.4 growth. I want to give a little context to the fiscal '25 projected right now. That number we brought down as part of the recap conservatively to account for the fact that there was some room that we could adjust it downward. There is some degree of risk in these numbers because the interest rate environment and the ensuing investment climate remains uncertain in the right now and foreseeable for the next year. I think Christina O'Connell, our treasurer collector, is doing a great job of maximizing to the greatest extent possible our returns and our investment income. But in the rate environment, I think if you had asked me where we would be a year ago today, I think the rates are higher than we would have expected. So that's one encouraging thing, but I think what remains an open question is to what degree, sort of competing factors that might alter the current rate environment are going to play out again over the next, the rest of fiscal '25 and through fiscal '26. So that will likely be one of the revenue items that we will watch, like we always do, very closely over the course of the year, and be mindful of again of the investment climate and how that would affect the town's our own investment results. So those are probably the highlights for the local receipts, but I will be happy to, kind of go into any greater detail during questions. Just on I think the last slide to wrap up, on other financing, the budget that Mayor Joyce filed includes $1.65 million in other financing, and you can see the fiscal 26 values here are, most of those are recurring from the prior years. The bulk of it is indirect recoveries from our enterprise funds, the largest being water sewer. We also still continue to budget $300,000 of an overlay surplus that we're forecasting right now. Closing fiscal 25, I've conservatively estimated that we would have probably a surplus in the overlay of roughly over $2 million, and that's before we put in any fiscal 26 amounts. So, I feel very safe that that number is affordable and achievable based on where we are. You'll see one item in here for the stormwater debt service. That right now, the debt service, we sold the bonds this year related to essentially capital projects. From last year, we essentially refunded a note by issuing debt, a bond. And of that, the piece that was assignable to next year for the stormwater fund is $64,771. It had been our intention when we set the rates last year, in fiscal 25, for stormwater, we were holding to keep the rates flat for 2 years, as the director of stormwater has anticipated there is a state regulatory change that's coming down that needs to really be accounted for, and we wanted to wait for that change before we essentially set the rates again. So what we would propose to do this year is use retained earnings from the stormwater fund that are available in fiscal 24 retained earnings, fund the debt service for fiscal 26 through those retained earnings, and then in the fiscal 27 budget, as we work to set the rates, accounting for that regulatory change, also account for the debt service going forward, the annualized value of this debt service. So this helps us essentially, that's a long-winded explanation of saying this helps us stabilize the rates in 26 at the same rate that ratepayers are paying in 25 with no change, take advantage of the retained earnings balance of the fund, and account for the going forward in 27. So when, we don't have to deviate from our plan to keep rates flat for fiscal 26. And that concludes my presentation, and I will happily answer all questions.
Thank you so much, Director Esmond. Be happy to open it up to the council for questions. Just as a reminder for all of us, this is the revenue forecast overview. If we have specific questions pertaining to departments, then we can, we need to be mindful that we can get those answered at the subsequent budget hearings when those departments are before us. So for open meeting law purposes and the purposes of the agenda, we want to keep tonight's discussion focused on revenue. And Clerk Semino, you can help if we need to push things out to another night. Okay, so thank you for that opportunity, and I will open it up to my colleagues on the committee for questions for Director Esmond. Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening.
Good evening.
Director, it's good to see you again, and having another year under your belt. You certainly comport yourself in a more confident manner this time around. I think overall my impression is that the conservative estimates and the difficult decisions that had to be made in the fiscal 25 budget preparation and what was accepted, I think it's safe to say that it was the right thing to do by the results that we're seeing. There were a few things that popped up over the year that I think would be unexpected, and so that's kind of the basis, is just to confirm a couple of these questions I have for you. And the first I have for you is for the local receipts page. And so, let's see. In the investment income, I know you touched on that a little bit, that it came in under projected. But I'm curious, was there at any time during the year, end of the first quarter, end of the second quarter, or end of the third quarter, that we were actually on track or closer to being on track?
I would say that over the course of each quarter over the course of the year, it's been slightly down, moderately down. The Fed started reducing interest rates really kind of, I want to say, late summer, fall, and so I think we saw by the end of the first quarter, and certainly by the second quarter, we saw the sort of financial institutions' behavior as far as their adjustments to that settling in. There are a number of different financial institutions that we invest the town's resources with. So each of them sort of has different strategies, and some are money markets, others are a bit more aggressive. I mean, we're bound to be, primarily at, making sure we preserve and protect our capital before maximizing return. So, I think all of those with that mindset are going to be adversely affected by the interest rates when they're when we're on a cutting cycle. I think the positive thing is, I think where folks had expected them to be more aggressive, the Feds that is, the inflation environment has not supported the confidence level that they would like to cut more aggressively. Right. And I think you're seeing that continuing. I think, we still have not sort of arrived at the level that has been sort of published from their policy perspective to give them the comfort to continue to bring rates down further. And of course, again, not being an economist, but knowing that there's a lot of, there are inflationary challenges that are on the near term and further out. I think that I would expect today that we would see that continued caution, even if next week, for example, you have the Feds moving. I think they're more moving because they're moving more incrementally than people had modeled out. I think at one point people were even saying that they thought they might not even cut it all this year. I'm not sure that. I don't want to predict that, but
right. But and overall, but thank you for that. That insight it's helpful, and I think it's helpful for the public to kind of understand that as well. It's always a moving target, and you do your best. And I know that in the last year, the town has taken a different approach in adopting, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was the prudent man rule from your investment, being open to give you more flexibility and being able to pick and choose. So, and obviously the town has some economic, or I should say investment advisors who we consult with. And I'm still confident that that's the right way for us to go. Overall, the dependency on the investment returns is playing, it's nothing to sneeze at, but it's not as overly concerning, I think, at this particular point, and being very cautious that these numbers for let's see, projected 2025, we haven't finalized the last 3 months of this particular quarter, right? So,
Right.
So these numbers, they may vary, they might vary just a little bit,
Right.
up and down. All right, thank you. That was more from an edification I wanted to hear. The miscellaneous non-recurring, last year in the budget, there was a proposal of none. What did the 230,000?
Yeah, so we use that revenue category rather seldomly, and we would typically never budget for it because it's truly like kind of one-off. So in this case, I think the 230 right now is essentially revenue from a prior year's refund we're getting from the IRS. So we have to record it as revenue.
Got it.
But we wouldn't expect that in a subsequent year.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's kind of a little bit of a bonus.
Right.
For us, so it's a nice to have.
Right.
But certainly, I think it's, again, to use the word prudent, not to expect or be overly optimistic.
Counselor, are you done with local receipts? I just wanted to piggyback on
Yes,
that
I am.
before
Go
you
right ahead.
transition. if
Please,
that's okay.
feel
Does
free.
anyone else have local receipts questions? Go right ahead, okay. And then we'll come back. Okay,
No
thank you,
problem.
Counselor.
Madam Chair, just on local receipts on miscellaneous recurring, remind me does that cover the tipping fees at the transfer station?
No, Counselor, that, sorry, I brought my cheat sheet too because, well, I can say no, that actually, the two revenue sources that make up the biggest piece of that are the mitigation agreement we have with the Plaza, and also we record funding, we get reimbursements related to student transportation fees there. The tipping fees fall under the other department fees.
Okay, that's
category.
under department fees, okay. And so what's factoring into the reduction in that number?
So we receive reimbursements from the Commonwealth for transportation for homeless kids in arrears.
So that basically varies due to population?
It's hard to
stuff like that.
forecast. We've,
Okay.
you know,
All right.
we're just, it's possible it could be more, although I think that we would expect last year was a high water.
That's fine. I appreciate the clarification, thank you. I'm done
Off
with
the
local
local
receipts.
receipts, all right. Well, there's no statute of limitations on local receipts. We can come back to it. Counselor Flaherty?
Thank you. So my only local receipt question is about payment in lieu of taxes. We have a 5% increase there, and I know that that's a process of negotiating various changes and arrangements that we have with the various entities in town that don't pay conventional taxes, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on what's being worked on to merit a 5.5% increase there.
So some of the increases are actually written into the agreement above, let's say, so for example, we have the landing in the landing we have, I'm sorry, Counselor, I'm blanking on the property.
Landing 53? They pay taxes.
No, it'll,
You can come
as I'm
back to
talking,
it.
it'll probably come to me.
Yeah.
We've stepped up, the schedule steps up annually, an increase in that pilot till they reach a certain amount, as part of sort of an agreement. That was, I'm trying to, I think that might have been struck in late 2010s. So we have some places where the year over year there's growth in it, so that explains some of it. We have others, I mean, one would be a good example would be with Massport. Our current pilot with Massport expires on June 30th. So we approached them with an offer, they have countered, and with some other pieces, language and some other things that we're working on with them. So that would be a different example where we do have a pilot that is expiring that is subject to, kind of being rewritten or updated. And then we've also had some conversations with Beld as well about that. Their agreement does not expire with us right now, but we're looking at sort of some changes that they have, that they've signaled they would be supportive of. Those two, the Beld and the Massport examples, are still continuing, but I think we have a high degree of confidence that the numbers that are reflected here are achievable under the current state of the negotiations with them.
Thank you.
Counselor Maglio?
To piggyback on Councillor Flaherty's question about the pilot category, do we have I didn't see in this booklet a breakdown of what those taxes are, or what those payments are, sorry, not taxes.
It's not in the budget book. I will, I'll provide the council with a schedule.
That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Maglio. I have a few questions on the local receipts as well, and I would like to just continue the pilot discussion at our finance meeting, the finance hearing, if that's the appropriate place for it,
Sure.
Director Esmond. The local, I'm sorry, the meals tax and the hotels tax and the excise tax. Are you tying that growth to our projections for the new development, both homes, businesses, retail, commercial, that, we're expecting to come in based on some of, the projects that are in the pipeline or underway with permitting or under construction?
So, in short, no. For fiscal '26, none of these amounts really kind of this is what I would call like sort of all organic sort of baseline growth.
Okay.
I think that's one of we sort of in the budget discussion, and thank you for that's a really important point of emphasis. In the budget discussion, we do try to identify like essentially opportunities and risks. And one of the key opportunities is that we do have development. Fiscal '26, as far as that level of impact, is I would probably put as pretty potentially uncertain of how much in fiscal '26 that will be actualized.
Okay.
But certainly in the ensuing years, we will start to see the benefits of that, and I think certainly have the ability to quantify across all three of those, and as well as potentially, certainly their impact on new growth, tax revenue. So in short, no, this is what I would characterize as baseline growth, where essentially the key drivers are going to be sort of the base inflationary price escalation. So, that would be, the meals away from home kind of category. If you're thinking CPI, hotels would be, room, night stay, the price of that, as well as in the motor vehicle. What's affected by that is the current price of vehicles and the replacement rate. So, as you know, your motor vehicle excise bill goes down every year as the car's value is depreciated and reflected in the schedule. But there's a rate of replacement of vehicle owners as they purchase new cars, and as cars prices are going up generally. So this is what I would consider, those would all sort of be baseline factors of this increase. Really not accounting for new growth in demand in the '26 number.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think just to put a fine point on it, it emphasizes that, these new projects, whether it's commercial, retail, or housing, take years to come to fruition and really see the benefit. But part of that benefit is the cherry on top, right? The meals and the hotels and the excise tax, that's like above and beyond the property tax revenue that we get, and we get to choose how we spend it. So I think it's worth emphasizing that that's yet another important benefit. And as we grow, we have more attractions and more people come to Braintree, and that they might want to see the herring on Saturday, and then they spend money at our restaurants and whatnot, and it's a nice cycle. So thank you for indulging me in that little soapbox. Okay. Those were my questions on local receipts. So I think, Councilor Reynolds, do you want to go back, circle back? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my next question is in the tax levy, under the new growth. You did make a statement about the number we see for 2025, I believe, was the projected number, and there was a comment about we saw something that was unexpected and we wouldn't expect it again. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. So the personal property, in fiscal '25, we, for the first time in a while, we used two different valuation engagements. One is primarily solely focused on personal property. The other would be on real estate. So the benefit of that is with a more targeted focus, what we've been able to do is capture more personal property value year over year. So if I could just give you a point in case, so in fiscal '25, new personal property new growth was valued at $28.2 million. The prior year, it was half that at 14.3, which is kind of the low water number, but we typically bounce around in the let's say teens in the millions for personal property. So 28.2 was a substantially high number. 800,000. That estimate assumes a reversion back to the, as far as new property, personal property, reversion back to 14 million. And that's a conservative estimate. We retain the valuation firm that's focused on personal property for 2 more years. The reality is that their work plan is just more robust than if we had one company really focusing on both. I think the point I was making, Councilor, that you're noting is that I think that we should treat that big spike as somewhat of an anomalous result of their efforts in fiscal '25, and it would not likely be repeated again. It's all in the base now, but it will not. I think we've captured a bunch of additional new growth that won't be repeatable for, again, for '26 and '27.
And this is real money, there's not an offset per se
No,
of somewhere else that we will end up paying next year or?
no. I mean, certainly a taxpayer has the right to work through the process for the assessor's office to contest or seek an abatement, but we haven't seen that activity that would substantiate that.
All right, well, I appreciate that. I do need to kind of chew on that a little bit more, and I may come back at another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions at this time for Mr. Esmond? One second, Sean. Go ahead, Counselor.
Are we free to roam around on this?
Yes, you may,
Okay.
Ron.
Thank you. So on the cherry sheet, on the reverse side, on the assessments, I've worked on 3 budgets in 3 different communities this year. What a party. There is an inherent increase in insurance costs that everybody's seeing, and I think a significant portion of that increase in the RTA assessment is due to that. That being said, I'm not seeing I didn't see this rate of growth in that number in the other 2 communities that I've worked in. So I think that, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that I think that's attributable to the incentive that was in the collective bargaining agreement that triggered more retirements.
Yeah.
So this is the part of the unintended consequence, I guess, of that. So that is, I think, a concern. I want to turn to the good stuff, the good things that we're seeing here that we're not, we don't talk about enough. This is so much better than last year. Yep. And not just because we passed an override, but you're maintaining discipline after the override, okay? We're not, we've removed free cash, but we're being disciplined in proposed spending. We're being conservative in identified, anticipated revenues, but you're also being realistic. I think you're basing it not just on, I'm going to throw 2.5% because, and you're not just saying, well, I need to close that hole, so I'm rigging this number up. There's a solid basis for all your numbers. The fact that this community is weaning itself off of free cash to fund operations is exceptional in this environment, this municipal environment. A lot of towns are trending in the other direction. And so the override was right, but you're also showing discipline that is going to benefit Braintree for years ahead. So those are really good things that I think we should just take a moment to, to celebrate, because we haven't had a lot to, we had a really hard session last time. And so we are in significantly better shape. We're not, by no means are we perfect, but we are in significantly better shape than we were last year. And, I think you deserve a lot of credit, and, I just wanted to chime in on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And here. Mr. McGoldrick?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good to see everyone tonight. I know it's been a little bit, so good to see a lot of familiar faces here. Just one, not a point of clarification, but I know we talked about the pilots, and I know last year in my report, in one of the appendixes, I had the top 3 as being Belled for about 1.5 million, Massport for about 350K, and then the landing for around 313K. So just figured I'd toss that information out there since I had it at my fingertips. And additionally, Director Esmond, I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure that I'm have my head on straight. The max tax capacity that we have is about 127 million, and it looks like we're projecting to use around 126. So we have excess capacity around 1.3. That was the plan, to build in that excess capacity to then use in future years. Do I have that accurate for my recollection? Maybe not.
Well, I think I provided in the materials the tax levy estimate. 127 is, that sounds right, Sean. And I'm just trying to think if what we provided had a comparable, that included a number of what essentially the unused capacity is. You said 1.3?
Yep, around 1.3 million. Because
Okay.
I took that one.
I would have it at considerably less than that, I guess.
Okay.
If you see that, I'm just looking at it, if you see the numbers, essentially the 124.6 that's for fiscal 26, and then our debt exclusion of 2.7, I think, and I apologize, I didn't bring it with me, but in the packets I sent earlier today, you'd see the tax levy limit that's included in that for the calculation. I don't think we were substantially above that number, but I could, but I certainly could follow up, Sean, with you and.
No, it could be me. I was just trying to do some quick math on the spot, so I could very well have missed that. And just my last question regarding overlay too. So I think we set around $2 million balance right now too. Are there any major ATB cases outstanding to your knowledge at this time?
So no, there are definitely some. I would say there's always some. It's in some form of process. But as far as actual litigation and pending, no. I think that we had a couple that were resolved last year, withdrawn, that were sort of on that area. I mean, I said 2.2 conservatively, accounting for sort of the the process that DLS uses for us to essentially reserve an amount for anticipated potential numbers. If you take the existing balance at the close of fiscal 24, which was over 5 million, and then account for those reserves, I would estimate we'd have about 2.2 million that could be essentially declared available. To the extent that we are continuing through fiscal 25, which did have the override, we haven't seen I haven't seen all the data, but we haven't seen activity-wise a lot of increase in taxpayers seeking abatements or exemptions, and higher than we've had. I think we need to see a full, kind of close out fiscal 25 to draw the final conclusion of that. But certainly it's good to just identify that this would be potentially a funding source. The mayor alluded in her comments the other day that she is going to continue to seek ways to provide relief to seniors and vets, for particularly for real estate tax programs, and this would be potentially one source that would be utilized. So we're mindful of that, but it's important to, not to necessarily treat it like a reserve, but acknowledge that there is a balance. We've been budgeting for it, I think, conservatively. Again, I think after we close fiscal 25, we'll have a good sense of filing activity and provide updates on what that balance is and whether that could be available for potentially additional programs. That overlay is essentially identified as the funding source for the senior work-off program, which I know we'll talk about in subsequent meetings, but that is the funding source, and in other communities have used it in other examples to potentially fund support expansions of abatements, exemptions, or other new program.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McGoldrick. Councilor Flaherty, any other questions right now? Okay. I have a couple of questions in that case. I just am curious, this Waterways Fund, do we no longer have a Waterways Fund?
We do still have it, Councilor. When we set that up, it was presented, at least as I understood it, as a recurring resource. It's not. There was a balance. We used almost all of it in fiscal 25.
Okay.
The mooring fees are deposited into there. I think the balance that we forecast was less than $10,000 for through fiscal 26. So it's not able to sustain the fiscal 25 level. At the same time, we weren't. The increase that was in previous years was higher than necessarily we felt we needed to support that program. So yes, it's zeroed out. I think what we would like to do as we look at fees and for other funds, this would be one, try to explore if there's other ways to increase the recurring revenue in that fund, and then continue the discussion about whether we could bring that back as a revenue source going forward. But yeah, essentially it couldn't be sustained at the level of fiscal 25, and it would, I think it's an opportunity that probably in its greatest would probably be something in the single thousands a year, given it doesn't have that much revenue right now.
So are those fees just going back into the general fund then?
They stay in the Waterways Fund, but they are single thousands of years
Okay, so it's
a year in
minuscule.
collections. It's not substantial right now.
Okay.
It's primarily the biggest revenue is the mooring fees. So.
Thank you. Yeah, please, go right ahead, Counselor.
So the $28,500 that was the balance in this account, that was an accumulation of numerous years of collecting mooring fees. So we'll continue to collect the mooring fees.
Yes.
Great. It's just really, this is more of an accounting kind of a related figure you're giving to us. It's not actually, we're not losing money, but we had to use the money for other purposes.
Well, yeah.
And rightfully so, right? It was available monies for the town to use.
Yeah.
And so, but what you're proposing for FY '26, the reason that it's a zero balance, again, could you just, so where will those fees go that we collect in fiscal '26?
They'll remain, those fees that we collect in '26 will be deposited into the Waterways Fund. The Waterways Fund is not zero balance, but it's very low. And I think at the close of fiscal '26, if I'm recalling, it will be less than 10,000. It would be available for fiscal '26. Essentially, it would be available. We should essentially treat it like a one-timer because it's at these levels.
Yeah.
It would be available at a very modest, like single thousands of people. So we didn't propose it this year. I think there is a larger fund exercise to sort of look at kind of residual balances and whether we need to keep them or whether we could put them to better use
Yeah.
to build up reserves, including free
All
cash.
right, well, you don't have to go any further, but I think you've absolutely answered my question. The main concern I have is we are talking about kind of small numbers
Yeah.
of dollars here, but thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Counselor.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay, and then the Whitechell settlement, is that in the spending section under debt?
Correct.
Okay, and so that looks like a $1.2 million more than last year?
The debt services.
Yeah.
786 of that is associated essentially with the Whitechell settlement.
Okay.
So, less than 200 of the 786 is associated with the cost of the short-term borrowing we did. So, we financed that 11.9 million with two different approaches. We bonded for 6 million of it, and the remaining 5.9 we issued short-term notes, which will be due next February. Those were specifically those that we identified, not as the number we thought certainly we will recover in insurance, but we thought it sort of broke that way that we would have at least tied closely to what we were at least in the litigation targeting for the recovery. There's two main pieces of litigation that are going to move forward, and I think we'll have to continue to watch closely and give updates to the council on how that's progressing. Right now, the budget doesn't assume when we collect the proceeds of the insurance litigation, we have an insurance recovery fund where we deposited that. So since the 11.9 was paid out, we've recovered, let's say, roundly $500,000 through a couple of litigations a couple of negotiations we are having. That's net dollars after the fees we paid for the firm that's leading that effort. Those sit in that fund. We will likely recognize them as revenue in fiscal '25, which will allow, ultimately, they will serve the purpose of reducing the amount that we need to go long to finance the balance of that 5.9. But the two big pieces of litigation that I noted are really going to be have the most meaningful impact for us in how much we can defray of that amount. And I'm sorry, I will definitely go into greater detail, and I will certainly give you guys whatever detail I'm kind of using round numbers, but I will certainly give you the very specific detail on this.
Yeah, I think if we can, I would definitely love to hear that again. Maybe I need to rewind the tape later. But yeah, I think we should probably get into the nuts and bolts at the finance meeting. Is that your recommendation,
Sure.
Director Esmond? Yeah. But in short, is it right to say that would we have that 786 to spend on town services if we had not incurred this?
Yes.
Wow. So that's like an important point as we think about the things that take a long time to come to fruition, but we're dealing with this right now. And that is a lot of money. Holy cow. And did you say 500,000 was recovered of the 11.9 million, or was it 5 million?
In net, 500,000 of net proceeds so far.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions at this time for Director Esmond? Councilor Maglio? Yeah, go right ahead.
Thank you. My question is sort of brief, and it follows up on something that we've communicated about in the past, and I'm just curious about the entire revenue picture. And is there any place in here that departmental grants would be showing up?
No. I would say that generally no. Unless a grant for some reason was recognized as federal revenue. So the only sort of modifications would be at, like for example, we have Title 19 Medicaid administrative reimbursements. So those fall under, if you see in the local receipts, I think we title it Medicaid. So that would be, essentially that's all federal funding is essentially kind of falls under a program that might be classified as a grant, but that would be the only cases where we would have it, where essentially it serves as revenue. The grants, I think that, I know I saw your inquiry previously that you're speaking of, all of that would be outside of the operating budget.
And where would we see that?
Well, that's something that right now we don't have a sort of an active way of displaying our grant spending from year to year. That is something that with the budget development, with the new budget document, that we prepared this year, that is definitely one of the things. This is an evolutionary process, and that is definitely a true all funds budget would show really kind of more detail on the, it would align more closely to your financial statements, essentially, that we reported on. So you would have large, budgeted amounts of large contributors to the other special funds, capital projects, et cetera. So I would say right now we're not at that level, but I think that's definitely part of the evolution and for refinement and improvements for our continuing to provide additional and more clear information.
So I can definitely appreciate that and the evolution of this, but I do want to sort of step away from that, from the technical aspect of that, to the practical application of that, which is that I don't have a sense, and I'm not sure where to look for how much money is coming in to the town of Braintree based on applying for grants that are available for environmental projects, for remediation projects, for hazard mitigation projects, for parties, for reimbursement, for whatever the needs are. And that's a really important source of funding and could really make the difference. And I'm trying to get a sense of what the scope of that is or what the scale of that is, and I'm not sure how to get that.
Sure. So I think we'll definitely respond to the request and try to, I think the short is the process right now is for us we do track in our chart of accounts, we do track what are grant funds, with that we can track what are federal versus state. But there's not a reporting, a comprehensive reporting report or similar activity that we're doing that where you kind of get that routinely, regularly. And so I think it's a little bit of a sort of ad hoc, yearly kind of just pull the information all together. So I think that's probably the best way that we'll answer that. But I understand, Councilor, your point. I think this is an area where, and I know the mayor's sort of challenged us as well to think about how we can continue to improve that sort of regular reporting of this information and making this information more available, and sort of and how we're doing as far as kind of accomplishing getting the funds we applied for and how we are doing getting those actually committed and spent and et cetera. I think that's a goal, and it's just one of the things is on the kind of in the next area of kind of improvement.
I can appreciate that, and I certainly don't want to change the positive tone of this, but I do want to say for the record that in 22, in 23, in 24, and now in 25, I'm making the same request. Yeah. And if we are investing in people applying for grants, we should know the results of those. If we are looking to meet budget gaps, we should know when those opportunities are out there and how many years in a row we've applied for those opportunities. When we are trying to expand, whether it's our economic development, whether it's our workforce development, whether it's our housing supports, we should know where there are funding opportunities out there and what the strategy is to capture them. And I know that everyone in the current administration is mindful of that, and this is not new information or some sort of special expertise, although there is a special expertise involved in identifying, tracking, cultivating, and stewarding those grant opportunities. And I have yet to get any information back on that. And so I want to say that I really need that to be part of this process. How can we make a decision on spending when programs and departments are doing really vital things, but we don't know what those are? That won't happen if the grant doesn't come in, because we don't know if there's a grant, even though we know there is because there was last year. But there is no central way to track that. And I will make the same offer, that I would be happy to come up with a tool and sit down when things settle a bit, because there are just some very simple steps I think we could take that I would love to be helpful if that's of interest. So I'll leave it at that.
Counselor.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sean, and then I'll.
Points that Council Maglu made too, and if we're looking retrospectively too, we can rely on looking at prior actuals, right? By looking at our, I think Tuesday, CBIZ was here presenting their financials. So certainly the combinings, they list out their grant types by expenditures and what they actually receive. Also the CFA, Schedule of Federal Awards, you can actually see what programs were received and what was spent on it. Also even the Schedule A that's submitted to DOR shows out the various parts and types in Part 3 for all the different grant types. So at least retrospectively, you can go back and look and see what we actually have. But to your point, forecasting, different stories, certainly harder to get your hands around.
Thank you. And I was going to add, Counselor, I wonder if maybe we could, so understanding that grants aren't recurring revenue, but serve a really important purpose for our budgeting, could we ask Lorraine C., our grant writer, to join us at the evening when we discuss the finance programs? I believe that's under your purview, correct, Mr. Esmond? Okay. I think that would be helpful, at least to have an understanding of what the current process is, what's going to be, and please, Councilor Maglio, either email or chime in, but like, what's the current process? How can we help? What supports are needed? And what's the plan moving forward? Because this is a continuing gap in knowledge and potentially gap in funding. So I think having Ms. C. here would be a helpful start. Great. Anything else? Go right ahead.
And I mean, it's a very worthy investment of time to invest in these opportunities to look, and they don't, and we understand the reality that they don't just appear because we send in an application for it. So there's, many different nuances and processes involved, but there's, and so in addition to maybe expansion of the financial piece, we could also get something on paper, concrete, that lists throughout the town.
Yeah.
Who's applying for what grants? Are we getting them accepted? Are we getting rejected? It's very common to get rejected, and it's fine. It's part of the process for some. Some grant, private foundations and corporate foundations want to see you come back a few times, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's how you do it. So it's not to poke holes. It's to build a robust mechanism for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor, and I'll just add in how the applications are getting prioritized with limited staff, I think would be really helpful to understand how that's getting prioritized. So thank you, Director Esmond and Clerk Semino. We can make sure that gets brought up again. I do have another question on the budget at a glance page, Director Esmond. When I look at the out years, so FY 27, 28, 29, It looks like starting next year, we're projecting to be, again, in a deficit situation. And then 3 years out, up to 4.2 million in a deficit. So can you talk a little bit about what the, what the thought is there and the
Well, at highest level, I mean, I think, you know, if I could speak on behalf of the mayor in this regard, I think she felt like it's really important to be transparent. And even with these cost affordability metrics, as far as like holding, you know, as we say, you know, we're projecting, let's say with schools, a 3.5% growth, that's an affordability. That isn't necessarily what the underlying costs that they're going to report that they face. General government, 2%. You know, we have different metrics for debt, and benefits and insurance is really, so that category is really dictated a lot by the schedules that are set, as well as some of the, you know, sort of trends we're seeing in the insurance markets. So the real transparent answer is we have, the hard work never stops. I mean, we really need to do things now with the mindset of how can we take, you know, anything we are able to accomplish structurally in fiscal 26, additional to this plan, helps all the way through to 29. And that's why we're not trying to be pessimistic by any means. It's just the structural challenge that municipal officials face is it's out there, it's in front of all of us, and we're just trying to be transparent about that. It's essentially, it just means that we've got to continue to look at we have to be clear-eyed about the challenges we face, and we've documented a few of them in the narrative. I don't think any of them will surprise folks. You know, whether it's the economic conditions faced by the town, whether it's some of the federal state uncertainty, weigh those against some of the opportunities that we've discussed. I think certainly we have not yet captured the benefit of development yet in this. And we will as we get more clarity, and that will certainly make these numbers, help these numbers. But I think it's something that I know, you know, it's not a solved problem that we're presenting here. You know, you can see those numbers. I think the good thing is that while they're hopefully transparent enough to show that there is a structural challenge, we also wanted to sort of put some grounding on that. I mean, over the next 3 years, in 27, 28, 29, those deficits cumulatively still only represent 1.1% of our revenues, 1.2%, right? So I think the opposite side of that is to say that this is an achievable problem. It just is going to require us to consistently be mindful of the impact of decisions that we make now have those impacts into subsequent years. And I will say, a year into this job, which I've enjoyed extremely, I can't see how this would be, that mindset isn't most to have at the local level. We do not have a lot of great revenue solutions, right? We don't. We do identify a few of those, you know, the Municipal Empowerment Act would be a good example where there might be some tools further given to cities and towns. We don't have a lot, where 72% of our revenue is really essentially comes down to the tax levy, which is highly regulated and controlled under the state law. So this just reemphasizes the things we can control, we should be mindful about as far into the future as we can, because those are, you know, these are, the numbers will be wrong in the sense that precision is not going to happen today for 2029. But directionally, I think everybody would probably agree that these are, you know, these are accurate in that picture. So, sorry.
No, very helpful. I appreciate that. One other question, the mayor had mentioned on Tuesday night at her address to the council that, and I assume this is under schools and general government, that the contracts for all of our unionized employees are assumed to be a 2% increase in 26, 7, and 8? Or
Correct.
Is it just 26?
So essentially, it's all 3 years. We
Okay.
didn't, what you'll see when we present on, from the HR, that we didn't, what we're doing is over the top. What you're looking at here, we've applied a growth factor over the top. So essentially, general government grows at 2% in this forecast outside from 27, 28, and 29. Schools is growing at 3.5. So in those numbers is implied those 2%.
Okay,
But the
and thank you, yes, we can get into the
yeah.
details during the HR discussion, yep, which is Monday.
Right.
Thank you so much for all the explanation and walking me through that, appreciate it. Any other questions at this time for Director Esmond on the revenue forecast? Okay, seeing none, if folks are amenable, I think that we can move on to the town council budget. Clerk Semino, are you going to present this one? Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay. So this year, the FY 2026 Town Council budget is reduced by $1,750. Just to go over again what the Town Council is the legislative branch of government with a 9-member body elected every even-numbered year. The council represents Braintree's residents, passes ordinances, approves certain mayoral appointments, and has the power to approve or disapprove the mayor's budget appropriations. The council can reduce the mayor's budget, but cannot increase it. The council's budget provides for the following: salary for the full-time clerk of the council, stipends for the 9 members, allocation to provide for the town's required outside audit, allocation for our town auditor, who reports to the town council, advertising fees that cover the cost of required legal notices for public hearings, conference fees for the Massachusetts Municipal Association, cell phone for the clerk of the council, and then line items for printing, office supplies, and meetings. Those include business card supplies, documents, printer cartridges, and everything necessary to conduct council meetings. Since FY 2019, the town council's budget has been reduced. The council had a reserve fund and a consultant fund, which were available to cover legal consultation, feasibility studies, or other unforeseen expenses, but were both reduced to 0 over the years due to lack of funding. This year, our decrease was the town auditor's line. It was decreased $2,500, and we did increase the dues membership subscription line to $3,000 because of the increased cost of the MMA. That's it.
Thank you, Clerk Semino. Any questions for the clerk of the council? Councilor Maglio, go right ahead.
I have a question. Clerk Semino, you staff, report, work with, collaborate, et cetera, with how many members of the council?
There are 9 members of the council.
And how many staff do you have assisting you in that role?
That would be just myself.
Okay, so you as an individual professional, staff the council, coordinate the meetings, coordinate the materials, provide the formal processes, the parliamentary procedure decisions, the discretion of calls and information. You're privy to every single email that we send that goes to the mayor's office, and then it comes back through you to all of us. So that's all you. There's no assistant, there's no intern, there's no part-timer.
That is correct.
Okay. just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. You do an amazing job.
Thank you.
I know this is not the night for that, but I appreciate you keeping all of us organized and focused.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I will echo Councilor Maglio's sentiment and also want to reiterate for folks who aren't working, or who may be watching from home, the councilors have day jobs. And we count on our clerk of the council to really keep everything running day in and day out for you, for the residents of Braintree, so that we can do our best to serve the community. And that is because we have Clerk Semino here helping us day in and day out, doing all the management that Councilor Maglio just relayed, and frankly, doing it for an exceptionally nobody ever gets paid enough, Clerk Semino, but I will say for sure, you're invaluable to the community. So thank you, and thank you for putting this together. I don't have any questions. I will also add again that I know for many years the council has hoped and wished for our own attorney, but we do not have the budget for that. So I will leave it at that. Any other comments or questions for the clerk of the council? Councilor Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to note, yeah, we do have day jobs, and you know that's the difference between the mayor and members of the council. That being said, we are under the charter an equal branch. We have responsibilities to review and approve requests from the mayor, appointments as well as financial requests. And the budget is developed in the mayor's office, but the review of the budget to ensure that it reflects not only the priorities of the mayor as she sees the community's priorities, but as we see the priorities of the community as well. A budget is a reflection of a community. It's the most, you know, as far as what government does, it is the most accurate reflection of what we prioritize as a community. It is clear we do not prioritize in this budget the role of the town council. We are the stepchild of this government, the way this is funded. We are not, this is disrespectful in how this is funded. And we maybe are guilty of not advocating enough for the needs of this council. And I'm not talking about, you know, what stipend each councilor serves. But given the attitude that has been expressed regarding how our one staff person should be compensated, and I won't get into the details of that, I'm just putting everyone on notice that this is the last year that this is going to look like this, if I have anything to do with it. We need a reserve fund in this budget. Our role is to respond to unforeseen and emergent circumstances, not only through interdepartmental transfers, but to have a reserve fund that is supposed to, by statute, be 0.5% of what the operating budget of a municipality has, so that we can act in emergent circumstances to move funds. That responsibility has been abdicated for several years by our government, and we should not tolerate that any further. This is wrong. Other communities pay snow and ice out of this. You know, we don't do it. We don't have capacity, you know, to react without taking it away from another department or trying to find a surplus in another department. Our audit function is limited. You know, I think it's great that the mayor's office puts out a weekly announcement online, a weekly flyer. My colleagues on this council, several of them, do a great job of that too, and they pay for it themselves. They're not subsidized by the taxpayers to do that. I think the messages that councilors have to send out to the public are of equal value to that of the mayor, and they should be funded as well. They've been ignored. So I am currently chair of the Personnel Committee. I will be using that chair to conduct hearings on how this budget can be improved so that it is respectable, because it does not allow us to do the function that we were elected to do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Moran. Any other questions for the clerk? Councilor Maglio, go right ahead.
I would like to piggyback on what Councilor Moran said. It's not specifically for the clerk, but in a past budget meeting, I remember feeling like we are seeing it is impacting democracy to not have a fully functioning, funded council office, council clerk. So when we have to worry about how do we save money, we'll have fewer elections or fewer polling places, and all of that makes very good financial sense. There's no criticism, but we're not doing it because it is a way to engage voters. We're doing it because we do not have the capacity to staff and manage and find volunteers for all of these polling places, to find volunteers to manage the different kinds of business that comes through here. So I just want to echo that, and I do have a question. Where does this budget originate? These numbers right here, this page that you gave us tonight or that we get every year.
So the proposed budget, the council president and myself review it, and he ultimately makes the recommendation.
And when you review it, who put it together to review? Do you look at last year's and?
Correct. We look at last year's, we look at what the actuals were and kind of chat about it that way.
Clerk Semino,
Thank
sorry to piggyback on that. Did the council receive a recommendation memo on funding levels from the mayor's office this year? I know in past years we have, so was that also provided, and could we get a copy of that if we don't have it yet?
Yes, it was typically level fund. And then the COLAs weren't put in for anybody at this point, correct, Mike?
Yeah, the budget memo that we had went out in, I want to say January 6th for fiscal 26. So we did ask for level service. That's defined as the cost in 26 of the services that are provided in fiscal 25. I would say that there was an opportunity for all departments. There was a separate template we asked people to fill out for things that were what we called above level service or above maintenance. That request, though, that was probably, I would say probably half the departments submitted something and along those lines of above it. And some of them were able to review and modify and maybe fund a little bit. This is largely a level service budget, though. I mean, and that's what we've highlighted, which I think is good that we've been able to accomplish that. I think that is an accomplishment, but we weren't able to fund lots of additional, even restorations, if you want to call them that, because I do recognize that historically some of the things we're talking about aren't new in expansion. They're what was in the budget maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But that's what level service was, and we did provide, I think we forwarded, after we sent it to the sort of departments that directly fall under the mayor, we forwarded to town clerk, town council, and a couple other departments like Pound Meadow and things like that that are in the town budget but aren't fall necessarily directly under the mayor.
Thank you. Anything further?
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Counselor Flaherty?
It's not really a question. It's just that I will take this moment now to say that we've seen this budget for the town council cut before, and now it's cut again. And this is just a recurring theme, not just for the town council, but for all the departments that Braintree has that we support. The council's limited, as Councilor Moran said, with its auditing capacity. It doesn't really have an ability to review things legally independent from the mayor's office, even though it is our task to change or add bylaws to our body of existing bylaws. Don't have a reserve fund. And it's something that the council is usually pretty quiet about because none of us do this for the purpose of making money for ourselves. We do it because fundamentally we care a lot about the town, and the other services like the police and fire and education and DPW are prioritized. But we're reaching a point in this town where it's not just a question of whether we're going to have extras. It's a question of whether we're going to be able to perform our basic services. And finding the revenue to support that, passing the override was a really critical component, but it's not the end of the story. And we're going to see it again and again as we progress through this budget, where we used to have a service that we were able to support and now we can't because the funding isn't there. And finding that revenue has to be the principal, one of the top priorities of this body generally. So it is it continues to be a pressing problem and deserves to be pointed out now at the beginning of the process, even though we'll have plenty of places along the way where we'll see it again. And I just thought I would take a moment to say that now.
Thank you, Counselor Flaherty. Well said. Okay, if there's no other questions on this, I think we move on to 25019, or do we need to table 25018?
We're going to table all of those on the page. I'll read it. Order 25018, 25019, and 25020.
Okay. So 019 and 020 will be taken up on another evening?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Clerk Semino. Do we have a motion to table order 25018, 25019, and 2520?
So moved.
To May 5th. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. Our next budget hearing will be on Monday, May 5th at 6 p.m. I want to say thank you so much to our BCAM team who will be with us all month, making sure that residents have access to the information on the town's budget. And also thank you, Director Esmond, who I know will also be with us all month, and thank you to Town Auditor Sean McGoldrick for joining us this evening. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor to adjourn? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.